I was at the 2006 Louisville Rutgers game, as probably 300,000 more fans will claim.
It's the arrival. I came in the league, went straight for the title.
Touchdown! Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvelous. Gets past Ransom. Donovan Edwards. Touchdown. The Don.
There's nothing quite like the game.
Michigan versus Ohio State.
This is The Rivalry, sponsored by Elevated Integrity Construction.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's JP from The Rivalry Podcast for a special bonus episode, an episode near and dear to my heart. If you pay attention to the show at all, we have our segment, Rutgers to the Rose Bowl, and it was time to get some Rutgers insight, especially this week going up against Ohio State. I've got Aaron Brightman. He is a co-founder for the Scarlet Faithful podcast. Aaron, how are you doing?
Very good. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. I want to get kind of right into it. So obviously this week, a big game. You've got Ohio State and 6-2 Rutgers going in. Ohio State, the number one team in the college football playoff rankings. The question looming around this, what do the Scarlet Knights have to do to be able to pull this upset?
Well, it definitely helps that they finally got their bye week. They had played 8 games in a row, 8 weeks in a row. So got a chance to catch their breath, a little bit more prep time for Ohio State. But, Rutgers' kind of script for winning right now has been pretty much the same week to week. And that's, not making mistakes, taking advantage of opportunities, mistakes that their opponents make. They're, not committing a lot of penalties. They're limiting their turnovers. So obviously they have to do all that against Ohio State. But I think the key to beat Ohio State, they're not going to be able to just line up and run the ball against the Buckeyes. So they're going to need to have some explosive plays in the passing game to be able to open things up. So I think that's really the key for them. If they can complete some passes downfield, I think they have a chance to compete. If they are just reliant on the run game, I think it's going to be really tough for them to, give a serious scare to Ohio State.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think on the podcast this week, I was talking about how it'll be a good test for Kyle Monangai. He's got, I think, 700-something yards. He's having a really, really good year for the Scarlet Knights. I'm interested to see how effective he's going to be able to be against the Buckeye defense. But I also believe in the Rutgers defense a little bit more than I have in the years past. And so I think it'll come down to some turnovers as well. If the Rutgers defense can get after them and do what Wisconsin did this past weekend, where they go in and they get Kyle McCord to throw a couple of interceptions and stuff like that, it could be interesting. I don't think that this is a Scarlet Knights team that should be taken lightly like I feel like they have been in years past. They've got some grit to them. People on the podcast know we actually talked about it before starting this. I'm a Rutgers guy myself. I love the Scarlet Knights. And I can answer this question for days. There are so many games I could pinpoint. But as a Rutgers guy, what has been a win in that program's history that you can look back on and you just have a core memory from?
Yeah, I mean, it's not too original, but I was at the 2006 Louisville Rutgers game, as probably 300,000 more fans will claim. But there's only 50,000 fans there. But that was obviously the top win, the iconic win of the program over the years. And it was second row, upper deck, 50-yard line, and it was pretty amazing. The whole experience, but just I also grew up a Rutgers fan as a kid, so I was going to games in the 80s and, when they were playing Colgate and Lafayette, so I was there for when they joined the Big East and, we're trying to become big-time college football. So to see that happen in that season, it was really special for a lot of people. And, it was a really amazing victory. Obviously, the high point of Schiano 1.0, and we're all hoping we can get, a kind of a sequel in his second tenure.
Yeah, and that kind of goes in. I mean, for me, that would be one of the answers for me is that Louisville game. I also think very fondly, mostly because of this podcast, it is an Ohio State-Michigan podcast. I think about that Michigan game with Gary Nova leading the charge, the Kamoko Turi blocked field goal. Like, there were just so many key moments from that game that I can look back on, and I'm like, because I hate Michigan so much, it was seeing a huge win for Rutgers, but also seeing the team that I despise the most just getting absolutely crushed was just phenomenal. But you started to mention the Schiano 1.0. We're in 2.0 now. We're a couple years in. What are your thoughts? What is kind of the fan base feeling around Greg Schiano's second tenure here? Has he exceeded expectations? Has he kind of passed where you guys thought you would be at this moment?
I think he's right where we had all hoped he would be now in year 4. He exceeded expectations the first year right away. It was a COVID year, and it was kind of a strange year, but to win 3 Big Ten games right out of the bat was huge. Second year, they were 5-5 in November. That was forward progress. Kind of fell apart at the end of that year, and then last year was a step back. So there was a lot of pressure to really get to 6 wins in a bowl game this year. Anything less was going to be certainly concerning in terms of how far he could bring it back this second time. So to be there already with a month to go, it's kind of flipped the script a little bit, where maybe people think maybe he has a chance to finish kind of ahead of where we hope they'd be at the end of the season. So obviously more games to be played, but I would say most fans would say to win 6 games and go to a bowl in year 4 is where we hoped we'd be. So he's kind of crossed that off the list and has a chance to add to it the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, the schedule is about half and half in my mind, where you've got Ohio State this week, then it's Iowa after that, then Penn State, and then finishing with Maryland, I believe. So to me, yes. I mean, I've seen Maryland play. I've seen Penn State play this year at the Horseshoe in Columbus. I'm convinced Rutgers has a chance in almost all of those, except maybe the Ohio State one. I don't know if I've convinced myself there, but Iowa and Maryland and Penn State all feel like games that the Scarlet Knights could come in and handle business and get a win in, which would be insane.
It's a chance to skip a step per se, so that opportunity is really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely agree. The one thing that I kind of want to give you a chance to go a little bit more in depth on, because here in Ohio, Rutgers seems to be like the butt of a lot of jokes, especially in years past when it comes to football and being in the Big Ten. It gets very annoying as a Rutgers guy. What is one thing you would say to somebody? What's something about this team that you think people should know if they've not watched a single second of Rutgers football?
I think that it's what Rutgers fans would part of what Schiano's tenure has appealed to the fan base is that the culture and identity that he forms. It's a tough team. Everyone is blocking. Wide receivers, running backs, on defense, everyone's swarming to the ball. A lot of guys that have been through some tough times. To see them go through the adversity they have, it's a mentally tough team. We have former, like Christian Dremel is the leading receiver, is a former walk-on. Holland Pierce, their best lineman, left tackle, he's a former walk-on. They have, just a lot of good stories. On this team. Timmy Ward had cancer and he's battled back. You have a captain that's a walk-on, leading special teams, Drew Lasari. So they have a lot of just like gritty, tough kids that have persevered and have helped form this culture that this team just hasn't quit. And, it's definitely, it's great to see it manifest this year on the field where they are not an easy out. Physically against Michigan and Wisconsin, for the first time, they held up. They looked like a Big Ten team out there. Obviously, they made some mistakes. They didn't execute as much as they needed to. But physically, for the first time, you looked on the field and you said, Rutgers looks like they can match up with any Big Ten team. And that was certainly a huge step forward. Yeah,
100%. And especially in the Wisconsin game, that was one that outside of the costly pick six, I mean, that's one that they realistically could have won. And so that's definitely a step moving forward. I want to talk a little bit more about this year's squad because there are a lot of younger guys, a lot of guys stepping up and making some plays. Who are some guys on this year's team that looking forward to next year you expect to have a bigger role that maybe people should kind of keep an eye on?
Yeah, well, wide receiver, true freshman, Ian Strong, he's had some flashes. He had that Sports Center number one play against Northwestern on Labor Day weekend. He's been a little inconsistent, but he's got a ton of potential. They're really high on him. He's going to be, a featured receiver, I think, really starting next year. So he's a guy for sure. They have another true freshman, Jashawn Benjamin, who's had some moments in the backfield as a running back. He's really a change of pace guy. So he's looked really good. And then defensively, I mean, they have a lot of veteran guys and some guys that can return next year. So that's certainly intriguing as well. But, there's a guy that I've been really high on that if Rutgers fans probably tired of me talking about, but Kenny Fletcher is a guy on the edge that's just in his second year. He hasn't gotten a ton of run yet because of the linebacker situation, but now with Tyrene Powell out for the year, Mo Toure is going to slide into that spot in the middle. So I think he's going to get more play now in November, and he's a guy I'm really high on in the future. So Schiano talks about building the pipeline. The recruiting class right now is the strongest they've had since he's been back coming in. So it's a developmental program, and there's a lot of young kids that haven't even really stepped on the field yet to even know where they're going to be. But I think certainly things are starting to click in terms of how his program is developing talent. And I think the coaching staff is as strong as it's ever been.
Yeah, and I think even looking forward, I know they're not underclassmen by any means, but you've got Gavin coming back with a full year under his belt as a starter coming back next year. Kyle Monangai is only a junior, so he's going to hopefully be back. So you're going to have two guys core to your offense. I want to talk a little bit about Gavin, though, because he's a guy that came in. He was, I believe, he was the highest, maybe recruit, but maybe it was, I don't know if it was recruit, but the quarterback position. He was the highest quarterback recruit in Rutgers football history. And I know that there was a ton of hype around him. What's the fan base thought? What are your thoughts dissecting him in his first, legitimate full year? Because he split time a little bit last year with Evan Simon and Vidral. Going into this year, the first year, him really taking the reins of the offense. What have you liked? What have you kind of disliked? What do you think are some areas that he can grow in?
Yeah, he's taken a huge step forward. Last year, not only did he split time, he was out for 3 games with an ankle injury. So when he came back, he was not fully healthy. So he didn't. They really kind of protected him. He didn't run a lot, which is obviously a strength of his and really changes things in terms of how defenses defend him. He also came back from injury when his offensive coordinator who recruited him to Rutgers fired, Sean Gleason. So he's gone through a lot. His first year at Rutgers, he left his high school a week into it to come to Rutgers. So even though it's his 3rd year with the program, it normally would be his 2nd year of college. He's now on his 3rd offensive coordinator, if you count the interim that he played under last year. So Kirk Ciarrocca has been a stabilizing force for him. His maturity, his poise, his ability to battle adversity. Last year you could see on his face when a mistake happened or he felt the pressure. This year he's much more calm, cool, and collected. He looks like he has command of the huddle. He's just a lot more confidence, and it's shown. He's made some tremendous throws. Accuracy is still a major issue. But I also think that, at times it's a hard balance, right? Where they're so run heavy at times. I feel like it doesn't help him get into a rhythm. And then when they're trailing by 2 scores, all of a sudden it's all passing downs. Yeah. So he's still developing. But he certainly, if you're a Rutgers fan, we haven't had a quarterback that's been able to throw like that in a long time.
Yeah.
And he's got some growing pains still going on for sure, but his decision-making has been better. He's limited interceptions. He's gotten better in terms of reading runs. I think that's something he can improve on as well. But I think, it's fair to hope and think and expect that year 2 under Ciarrocca next year as a starter, he's gonna grow even more.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be interesting going into this week on how Ohio State's going to defend that, because I don't think that they've played a quarterback that's as mobile as him. I don't know if his arm necessarily is where it needs to be, but on the ground, I think him and Monangai can be a real threat. I know it's a little bit too early, but I do want to pick your brain on this. I know there's some projections out there already, but they're obviously already bowl eligible, most likely going to be going somewhere to play football in the postseason. What's your ideal bowl game for this Rutgers team, and what's an opponent you would love to see? This doesn't have to be crazy realistic, but who would you love to see them go up against? Because I've seen a couple of things written out here and there. It seems to be like the Boston College, the NC States. I saw one where we played USC at one point, and then one where we played Tennessee, and I'm like, I don't know how you get that, but your thoughts? Yeah. Where would you love to see this team play, and against who?
Well, realistically, the best bowl I think they can go to is the Music City Bowl in Nashville on December 30th. Iowa went there last year at 7-5. I don't think Rutgers would get invited at 7-5, but maybe 8-4. They'd have a chance, especially depending on how many teams go to the playoff out of the Big Ten. And they would play an SEC school. So I think that Tennessee projection you saw was for that, which, if fans are aware, Ohio State fans might actually know this because Schiano went to Ohio State after the Tennessee job fell through, with that fan base kind of ambushed him. So that would be certainly a storyline to watch for.
Yeah.
If Rutgers and Tennessee played each other. I don't particularly like that matchup for Rutgers. I don't think it's a very good one for them.
Yeah.
The Pinstripe Bowl is the most realistic. It's in New York. They know they'll draw. If they don't win another game, I think they're definitely going there. And yeah, it's against the ACC. One intriguing one that I saw was it could be Clemson now that they're 4-4. If Clemson's 6-6, 7-5, so that would be interesting because obviously they do have a ton of talent. But yeah, for me, the Music City Bowl would be awesome. It's in Nashville. It's right before New Year's. It's a pretty high profile game in terms of just playing the SEC. I'd like to see them. I think teams they could beat in the SEC, maybe Kentucky, which would be another storyline because that's who Wimsatt chose over. And he's from Kentucky, obviously. So, there could be some interesting storylines there for sure. I think that's definitely realistically the best game they can go to, and would be a lot of fun no matter who they play. And the chance to play an SEC team would be a chance to make a statement if they could win that game.
100% I would be all for it. I'm going to be there either way. I've decided that whatever bowl game they go to, I think the last Rutgers game I've been able to attend outside of like a Big Ten matchup was I went to the bowl game. It was the Quick Lane Bowl in Detroit when they played North Carolina when I think it was Mitch Trubisky was the backup. And so it was Gary Nova, Leonte Carew, all those guys were still in there. And it was phenomenal. They won like 40-21. It was great. I had a great time. I'm planning on wherever they end up, I'm going to be there. So the last question for you, Aaron, this is something we always kind of close out our show with. Who right now, and I know they've given the playoff rankings already, who are the 4 best teams in college football in your mind?
Yeah, I think, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, and the fourth one I think is a little bit up for grabs, but I would go Florida State, I think, in terms of just their resume and the way they've been pretty consistent. I think they have potential for sure to win in the playoffs. So I think those are the 4 best teams.
Who do you think would be the first 2 that get left out?
Well, I think, Washington is knocking on the door. So I think they're probably right on the border there. And then the other team, that's I don't know if it's going to be. It's funny because I guess it could be Oregon, which would be funny because that's 4 Big Ten teams in the top 6.
Yeah.
Next year is going to be wild. By the way,
I'm dreading it.
The 24 schedule is coming out soon. So, I'd say maybe Oregon or maybe Alabama. I don't know. I feel like Alabama always gets boosted just because it's Alabama. So I could see them being placed really close. If they don't lose again, I think they're gonna. It's obviously those other teams haven't lost yet, but it's gonna be tough They're gonna be right there.
Yeah, and they're gonna have a ton of prove-it games. I think they have one of the hardest schedules to kind of close out the season with Alabama at least. And so I agree 100%. It seems like they could have 2 losses and somehow, some way, they're always ranked 5th, and you're like, what is going on here? It just doesn't make sense. Well, Aaron, I do want to give you a chance. I mentioned it at the very, very beginning. You are the co-founder for the Scarlet Faithful. Do you want to share just a little bit more about what that is, where people can find you?
Sure. Yeah. I grew up watching Rutgers since the 80s. I graduated in 2000, and I own and operate my own Rutgers Athletics website. I've covered Rutgers Athletics for about 8 years now, and so I have a daily podcast. The site is thescarletfaithful.com, and I'm Apple, YouTube, all that. And then my Twitter is at Aaron_Brightman. And, obviously I focus on basketball and football, but I do try to cover as many Rutgers sports as possible. We're still trying to, prove ourselves in the Big Ten. So any positive Rutgers story, I try to get out there. And, I really do think that in year 10 coming up, that there's a lot of room to grow in that next decade. And I'm excited to see what Rutgers can do in the Big Ten.
Awesome. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for being a part of this. And thank you guys for watching. It's the Rivalry Podcast.
The Rivalry is a production of River Radio Ministries. Want live updates from the show? Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at RivalPod. Visit our Patreon and consider becoming a patron for exclusive bonus content, merch, and more. And be sure to follow us wherever you're listening now for new episodes every Tuesday. And if you like what you're hearing, tell a friend so they can listen too.